Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today you are checking out a Magicka Dragonknight solo PVE build. This is updated for the ELSWEYR chapter in ESO, and what can I say? This build is a lot of fun to play. Dragonknights did get quite a few buffs in this chapter, at least from a soloing and from a PVE standpoint. Healing, for example, has never been better on the Magicka DK. So we've got great survivability and defenses on this build, even in light armor. Great damage and great sustain all wrapped into one. So if you're looking for a great solo build that can handle dungeons, pledges, world bosses, even monster helms by yourself, then I think you're going to enjoy this one. I know some of you have been asking for this one for a long time, and it's finally here. Solo Magicka DK for the ELSWEYR chapter. Let's jump right into it. Alright, here we go. Magicka Dragonknight solo build. The outfit style is really quick in case you're interested. It's Dremora helm, Dremora staff, and the rest is the Fire Drake motif. So I thought that kind of fit with the Dragonknight theme for the build. I don't know, I like it. I think it's cool. Let's go ahead and jump into those stats though with our usual disclaimer that I'm not completely min-maxed on the build yet. You'll get a few better stats if you gold out all your gear, you have gold glyphs, max level undaunted, those types of things. Also keep in mind this build was created completely for solo gameplay, so you have to consider different things. It's not a pure DPS build. On this build, we're looking specifically at healing, we're looking at survivability, resistances, damage, recovery. All of that stuff needs to be balanced in order to play effectively when you're trying to solo dungeons and world bosses and things like that by yourself. So just keep that in mind. It's not a pure DPS build, though I will give you a couple of ideas if you want to switch into more of a group DPS role on this setup. Let me go ahead and use a potion here, and spell damage buff would be good. So sitting at base here, about 37,000 max magicka, about 21,000 health, 12,000 maximum stamina. Our magicka recovery is sitting at about 1,000. That does go up quite a bit, though, with some of our back bar glyphs. We are going to use Elemental Drain also, so that recovery is more like 2k Magicka recovery. Our spell damage sitting at 2,300. That will hit about 3k with our Berserker glyph on the back bar. And then if you decide to use the new Molten Whip, you'll get about 3.3k, so we'll talk about that when we get to the skills. Sitting at 62% spell critical, and then a pretty solid 22,000 and 20,000 spell and physical resistance. That's in light armor. That's 5 pieces of light armor and 2 heavy right now. 64 points into our magicka as expected. For our food here, I'm using double Bloody Mara. This is the newly buffed gold drink in the ELSWEYR chapter. It gets you close to 5k max health and 4,500 max magicka. It's really great on the Magicka DK, you guys. Definitely check this out. It's pretty cheap to get on Guild Traders as well, so I definitely recommend that. It will reduce your vampire stage if you've chosen to be a vampire, so just keep that in mind. For the Mundus Stone here, I'm using the Lover Mundus. This is a great choice for a completely solo build. This will give you basically the best damage possible. It's going to get you really close to that penetration cap for world bosses and dungeon battles. If you're having any issues sustaining, you could use the Atronach here as well. So we'll talk about our buffs in a minute. I have Minor Protection active, Major Ward, Major Resolve passively, so we'll get to that in the sets. For my potions here, I'm just using basic trash magicka potions for a little bit extra sustain. I feel like that's all I need on this build. We're also passively getting spell damage and spell critical while we're on the front bar, so we don't need to worry about those. Cheap potions, yes, love it. For the race here, I am still using my good old Dark Elf, which used to be best in slot for Magicka DK long ago. I still think it's pretty good for a solo build, and I'll tell you why. This dynamic passive is very good. You get the max magicka and max stamina there, 1875. I feel like this, and with our champion point bonuses, and especially if you have Undaunted maxed out, which I don't have quite yet, this will give you enough stamina to play solo if you're a Dark Elf. If not, if you're a Breton, you might want to use Tri-Stat food on this, just so you have enough stamina to sustain blocking and roll dodging But on the Dark Elf, I feel like I don't need it, and so that lets us run the awesome double Bloody Marrow, which is amazing, amazing buff here. This actually scales with our level, I forgot to mention, so closer to 6k max health and over 5k max magicka. This gives us a really nice health pool, you guys, close to 21,000 on a light armor build, which is awesome. So I think that covers the basics. Let's go ahead and jump into the gear next. So I have a couple of surprise sets in here that I think you'll find interesting, but let's start with our damage focus set because we definitely want to focus on damage even as a solo build. I'm starting off with Mother Sorrow as my first 5-piece set. This gives us just great stats for Magicka DPS. We've got max magicka, 2 basic spell crit bonuses, and then our 5th piece here gives us 1857, about 2k if it's golded out, spell critical, and this is active all the time. So this set just gives us really good spell crit, lets us do excellent damage, excellent healing as well. This is also an overland set, so you can actually farm this yourself, as well as buy it from guild traders, whatever works best from you. Now I am using a lightning staff front bar, and then a flame staff back bar, so no restoration staff on this build, using double destro. This infused lightning staff, you can actually get this from a quest in the zone of Deshawn. Let me show you really quick where you can pick that up for free. That's going to be over in this Silent Mire area. It's a really simple quest, and it gives you that infused lightning staff, which is going to be really great for this build. You could also use a Nirnhoned lightning staff. You could use sharpened, although if you use sharpened, you'll probably want to drop the Lover Mundus for something else. Now I am using the spell damage enchant here, the Berserker Glyph, for 450, actually closer to 500 spell damage every 5 seconds, and you can proc this off of cooldown on your front bar, so that gives you a lot of spell damage, which is really great. And then for our back bar, you definitely want an infused Inferno staff here, because we're going to be using that with Wall of Lightning for great damage, and then actually great sustain too, because we're using Absorb Magicka as the enchantment there. That gives us about 450, closer to 500 if you have that golded out, and that's every 2 seconds as long as you have Wall of Lightning, or sorry, Wall of Fire active. That's really great sustain and damage on your back bar. So we got 2 pieces covered by the weapons, and then for your other 3 pieces, you can just pick up jewelry, necklace, and 2 rings would work just fine. You can grab these from the dolmens, farm them yourself, pick them up from treasure chests, or like I said, buy them from guild traders. What I recommend there is 2 spell damage glyphs and 1 magicka recovery on those if you can. So we want to think about survivability next when we're taking a lot of pressure playing solo. I like something that has a damage shield, so I started looking into this set. The Combat Physician set, really interesting set, comes from the Wayrest dungeon, which is in Stormhaven, which is right here. You can farm this from Wayrest Sewers 1 if you want. Just the first 4 bosses will drop this set. What it does is you have pretty good overall sets for a magicka build. You have max magicka, 2 bonuses to spell crit. So again, we have very high spell crit on this build, which is great. But then our 5-piece set here, when we critically heal ourself or an ally, but basically ourself, you get a damage shield that absorbs 9k damage for 6 seconds, and the effect happens every 6 seconds, so basically 100% uptime on this as long as you have heals over time running, which we certainly will, and I'll show you those in a minute. But yeah, 9k damage shield, this can scale up even higher, closer to 10k. If you put more CP points into damage shields, it does scale up with that. And if you guys have seen any other of my Magicka solo builds, you know I like using damage shields that are just automatic, that I don't have to think about. This one is just going to proc by itself every 6 seconds. As long as I keep my heals up, I get a nice juicy damage shield on top, which is going to help absorb a lot of that incoming damage from harder hitting enemies, bosses, world bosses, whatever, and it's going to give me room to breathe and take on some pretty hard content on this build, so I like this set. Now, I was looking at this set for a while and trying to figure out how I could use it like on a healer build. The fact that it's only 1 target makes it kind of garbage for a healer, but when you're completely solo, this set is actually really great. So I am using this on my body here. This is a light armor set, so I have light boots, legs, hands, waist, and chest. If you can get those in divines, that would be ideal. With all max Magicka as your enchantment, you can do a couple tri-stat enchants if you want to tri-stat the chest and the legs. Go for it. That'll give you some extra stamina. But yeah, this just makes the build super easy to sustain, super easy to stay alive in more difficult content. Now for our monster set, you can choose damaging set, but I wanted to build in even more defensives and more survivability on this DK build. So I decided to go with the Mighty Chuden set for all the resistances and the health here. You can see the one piece gives us a lot of spell resistance, a lot of physical resistance, and then the two piece bonus here actually gives us 2 bonuses, which is actually really nice. You get an extra 1100 max health, which is awesome for soloing. And then we have Major Ward and Major Resolve up at all times. That's our basic defensive buff. And like I said, you could run a more damaging set here if you want. Something like Valken, Scoria. Zahn, if you have access to that monster set, will give you a lot more damage. But why I like Chuden personally on this build is it just makes the build easier to play. It's one less skill that I have to worry about in my rotation. I don't have to cast spiked armor. I drop that for an extra heal on the build, which I'll get to in a second, but that extra heal helps me proc my combat position set. So with these two sets working together, I just think it synergizes really well. It makes the build super defensive, super tanky in light armor, and just makes it really easy and fun to play, in my opinion. So yes, that's my monster set that I'm using right now. So I'm actually doing one heavy helmet here and light shoulders. That's pretty much just what I had access to. I don't have the best traits yet. You want divines if you can get those. And then if you have access to your Undaunted passives completely, you could even run a medium shoulder here. Heavy head and medium shoulder would give you the best Undaunted stats that you could get on this build. So that covers the gear. Let's move on to our skills that we're using. And I actually want to start on the back bar first, which is going to be our buffs and our utility bar, basically. So we're starting with Elemental Drain. Remember, this is our back bar destruction staff. So Ele Drain gives you Major Breach for 24 seconds. So that's our 50 to 80 spell resistance debuff. And then this is also our sustain. So I had about 1k base sustain on the build. This is going to give us 300 Magicka back every 1 second. That's basically 600 Magicka recovery on your stat sheet. So just keep that in mind. This is really great for any long boss fight. It makes the build very sustainable, even though we don't have a lot of spec into recovery. Next up, Blockade of Fire. This is our AoE damage over time. Gives us about 2k or more damage a second when it's fully buffed. And then, like I mentioned, we are using Absorb Magicka here on the back bar. That's going to give us that 500 Magicka back every 2 seconds on the glyph there. So that's very nice for sustain as well. So basically with these two abilities here on the back bar, we're getting 1100 Magicka recovery just from running these two things on a boss. Really good sustain. Next up, Molten Armaments. This is our major sorcery, so spell damage buff by 20%, definitely needed. It also is a very nice buff for heavy attacks. 50% damage to your heavy attacks while this is active. We are using the lightning front bar for heavy attacks, for extra sustain, for AoE damage, and so Molten Armaments, really great skill to be using on a lightning staff build for sure. Because since it is an Earthen Heart skill, you get really good passives here. You get ultimate generation every 6 seconds for casting Earthen Heart. You also get 990 stamina every time you cast an Earthen Heart skill. So feel free to cast this more if you have the Magicka. And then we've got Cinderstorm next. This is a heal over time. This is AoE based, ground based heal over time. But the heal is actually really good once all our buffs are active. That's at least 2k heals every second. Does a nice little snare to enemies in your area as well. And this is just a nice heal over time to help combat physician be procced all the time. Since we do have a high crit rating, most of those will be crits, and that's going to proc the damage shield from combat physician. So really good. It also lets us run a Inferno back bar, so you don't have to run like a restoration staff with rapid regen. This is pretty much the same healing, just it's AoE, so you need to make sure you're standing in your AoE. Plus it looks cool, so why not? And our last buff here is going to be Cauterize. Cauterize is another heal over time, but more like a kind of like a mini burst heal. Every 5 seconds you get this heal to go off automatically. Also gives us Major Prophecy. That's a 10% spell critical boost while we're on our back bar. So that's really nice. Really good healing, really strong, and definitely going to help you stay alive. Another heal to proc Combat Physician. Then for our ultimate here, definitely going to recommend Standard of Might. This ultimate costs 250 ultimate, but it is amazing when you have it up for 18 seconds. So it does really good flame damage, applies Major Defile, really not that useful in PVE, but it does increase your damage done and reduces your damage taken by 15% while it's active. So that is huge, huge for solo. Great damage increase and then great survivability. Also keep in mind, every time you activate an ultimate, we are getting resources back. So from Battle Roar, we're getting about 47, 46 health, magicka, and stamina for every point. 47 times 250, that's like 12,000 per resource pool that you're getting back when you pop that Standard of Might. So definitely a great ultimate. Let's switch to our front bar now, which is our main offensive bar, and I'm going to give you a couple options here. The first setup here is going to be mainly for AoE fights and especially for trash pulls, working your way through a dungeon. This is what I would recommend, and then I will put you... Then we'll talk about where you can put Molten Whip for a little bit more single target damage. But let's start off with Burning Embers. This is a 10-second damage over time, does really good flame damage. And it's actually kind of like a burst heal. So heals you for about 80% of the total damage when the effect ends. So you can apply this to start a fight. And then as soon as you recast it, it's going to end the effect and it's going to give you that 80% burst heal. So if you're taking big damage on your front bar, let's say you just take a huge AoE or a heavy attack from a boss, you can instantly recast this and get a nice juicy burst heal back. So it's great damage and great survivability in one skill. Amazing, amazing skill. Next up, I'm using Choking Talons. Choking did get a bit of a buff in the ELSWEYR chapter, so it's doing really solid magicka damage, over 6k unbuffed, and this is AoE, so it's doing AoE damage. It's doing an AoE immobilize as well as minor maim. So minor maim is very good if you're trying to solo your way through a dungeon. It's going to reduce all the damage you take by 15% on all those targets that you hit. Now, even though this is AoE, you can use this on a boss as well, because a minor maim is still going to affect the boss or even the world boss, making them do 15% less damage. It doesn't sound like a lot, but with a boss that's maybe hitting you for 10, 11, 12k on your light armor build, any reduction you can get makes a huge difference. So I definitely recommend casting this if you're fighting bosses as well, but it is great for AoE damage. Now, going along with our AoE trash pulls and things like that, I definitely would use Draw Essence. Draw Essence does a decent amount of magic damage up front, but why I like it is it does heal you for over 100% of the damage caused. So you get a nice AoE bit of healing here on your front bar. Looks like that. Now what you won't see is the after effect here. And that is the second part of our ability. After 2.5 seconds, you exhale fire and you deal 6k flame damage. You also restore 10% of the ability's cost for each enemy hit. So 10%, if you have 10 enemies hit, you would get all of your magicka back while doing really good damage and also healing. So this is definitely my go-to skill on the front bar if I'm trying to work down a group of mobs. You want to drop your Wall of Elements. Bar swap, you can block, do a Draw Essence here, and then a Talons. That will, in a normal dungeon, that will basically clear out the entire trash pack. You'll take very little damage, and you'll just wipe out everything. Now, another AoE ability that you can throw in here is going to be Engulfing Flames. This does really nice flame damage in front of you, plus flame damage over time, and Enemies affected with this take 10% more flame damage, so why not? It's a DK. Run that flame breath and debuff everything in front of you. Then we got Inner Light. This is just our extra Magicka here, 5% max Magicka, plus Major Prophecy, which is 10% spell critical on our front bars. So you have a nice balance here. You have Inner Light giving you 10% critical here. Then you have Cauterize giving you 10% critical on the back bar. You'll always have that up, and you don't have to worry about buying potions or crafting potions for that spell crit buff. Now for our ultimate here, I'm using Temporal Guard for the minor protection. This is basically a passive ultimate slot. I'm very rarely going to use this in any type of PVE encounter. But while slotted, I get minor protection 100% of the time on my front bar. That's reducing my damage taken by 8%. So that is really great on any type of solo build. Having that extra form of protection makes you take a lot less damage overall. Now, not only that, but our passives here in the Sigic order, you'll need the Somerset chapter for this skill line, by the way. But the passives make this even better. There's this passive called Concentrated Barrier. This scales up with our champion points, by the way, which we'll get to in a minute. But almost a 6k damage shield from blocking. And you can proc that every 10 seconds. So we talked about, you can buff up here, your back bar, make sure your heals are down, Wall of Elements, bar swap, block into a Draw Essence. You see that nice damage shield? That's a 6k damage shield, plus I'll have my 9k, almost 10k combat position damage shield up. So I'll be taking very little damage on my front bar. It's super nice, very defensive ultimate. It's one of the best passive ultimates in the game for sure. Now, it does take a little bit of grinding to get this down. Again, definitely worth it. If you don't have it yet, a couple things you could do. You could do Meteor if you have access to that in the Mages Guild. You could also do Magma Armor for a defensive ultimate. That's what I would recommend until you get that. But Temporal Guard, definitely best in slot for a solo DK build, in my opinion. Now, this is our basic trash pull AoE type setup. If you want to go for a completely single target setup, if you want a little bit more damage, then what you can do is change Draw Essence out for Molten Whip, because Molten Whip got a huge buff in the ELSWEYR chapter. While slotted, you get a stack of Seething Fury, increases the damage of your next whip by 33%, and spell damage by 125 for 5 seconds. And this effect stacks up to 3 times, so it's a huge bit of burst damage. This build is not even made for DPS, but I can easily hit over 30k on a whip running 2 defensive sets. This skill is crazy good damage, low cost. You just have to proc Seething Fury 3 times. So you can do 1 Burning Embers and 2 Engulfing Flames. It'll give you really good damage, and then proc this, and then go back to your back bar heals and Blockade of Fire. But again, that's for a completely single target boss fight or something like that. This is not going to help you a lot if you have a lot of AoE pressure. Again, if you have a lot of AoE pressure, I'm definitely going to recommend Draw Essence instead, because you get the nice AoE damage, plus the healing is really important. So you can definitely swap those out based on the fight. So in terms of passives, I don't want to go too deep on these because this video is already getting a bit long, but you definitely want to pick up all of your class passives here. We are using double Destro Staff, so Destruction Staff passives, you want all of these. These are very good. I am in 5 light armor, so you'll want all 5 of these passives, and I am using 1 heavy. So if you're using heavy, you'll want the first 3 heavy armor passives. If you have 1 medium, then I would recommend Windwalker for the extra recovery, as well as Athletics. Those are kind of the main 2 if you're using medium. Fighters Guild, pick up Banish the Wicked. Mages Guild, if you have this maxed out, Magicka Controller gives you 2% Magicka and Magicka Recovery for Inner Light on the front bar. Definitely good if you have that. Sigic Order, we talked about. The really main important one, the only one you're going to use, is called Concentrated Barrier. That gets you the 6k damage shield on your front bar. Super good passive to get Undaunted, if you have those, go ahead and max those out. Assault and support we're not really using. Always get your class skills. And then under alchemy, always pick up medicinal use for the extra potion duration. Now onto champion points, which are pretty important when you're building for solo. I'm not a CP expert. This is just kind of what I would recommend, and it seems to work pretty well. But you can definitely tweak these. So in the green tree, 40 into Warlord for that break free. 43 in tenacity because we can do a fair bit of lightning staff heavies, and that gives you a good bit of magic back when you do that heavy attack. 75 into Arcanist, 27 into Mooncalf. Got 56 into Shadow Ward because I am blocking quite a bit. Remember, on our front bar, we get that extra damage shield. So why not reduce the cost a little bit too? Tumbling just for a little bit, roll dodge. Now in the blue tree, 15 into Blessed, 34 Elfborn, 56 Elemental Expert, 42 into Spell Erosion, 16 into Staff Expert, 51 Master at Arms. This is going to help your Molten Whip. Now if you decide not to use Molten Whip, you can drop this completely because that's really the only direct damage we have. Everything else is going to be damage over time, which gets buffed by Thaumaturge. So I have 56 into Thaumm right now, and you can put more in there if you end up dropping Molten Whip. In the red tree, 56 Ironclad, 43 into Hardy and Elemental Defender, 28 Thick-Skinned, 41 into Light Armor Focus. This is something I like to do on the DK because Dragon Knights get something like 3k passive spell resistance, and then from Light Armor I think we get about the same. So we end up having a lot more spell resistance than physical resistance. So I try to bump this up just to kind of make them a bit closer. So 41 there is going to give us over 3k physical resist. 19 into Quick Recovery. And then 40 into Bastion. This is only if you're running a damage shield set like Combat Physician, which I've chosen to run on this build. This brings up my damage shield from like a 7k tooltip, I want to say, on Combat Physician to over 9k-ish. So really good if you're using a proc set like Combat Physician, or if you're using the Iceheart Helm. Always put points into Bastion. If you're not, then I would not bother. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for this solo Magicka Dragonknight build. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you liked what you saw here, do me a favor and smash that like button. It really does help me out and helps get these videos out there and noticed on YouTube, so I always appreciate that. If you're new to the channel and you're looking for more builds like this one, hey, I have lots more solo builds on the channel just waiting for you to check out. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button too. There's new videos here on the channel every week. And until the next one, I hope you have a great day. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you around in the next video.